Hello and welcome to Fundraising TV. My name is Norma Johnston and I'm your host for the programmes that are coming up. The programmes are about fundraisers, for fundraisers, and we'll be looking at what are the hot topics, what are your fundraising colleagues doing right now, what are the issues they're facing, what are the challenges they're dealing with, and how are they overcoming them. The programmes are weekly. They'll be going out each Wednesday and they'll last for about 20 minutes and they'll cover a range of topics each week. This week our topic is major donor fundraising and you'll be hearing from speakers about capital appeals, the pros and cons of running a successful appeal, and you'll also be hearing from one of our speakers about taking those major donors overseas. As many of you will know, something that is fraught with risk but is hugely beneficial when it really works. So what is Fundraising TV and who's behind it? I spoke to John Baguley, the founder and chief executive of the international fundraising consultancy, IFC, and asked him how he came up with the idea and is it really new?
Fundraising TV is something which is very different to any other podcast that's already out there. So Fundraising TV is something which, as I've known from watching the interviews you've been doing, is absolutely fascinating. It is something whereby you hear expert views from fundraisers, or actually practicing fundraisers, and consultants who advise them, and from people who have been there and done it, so that you get a view of this, of how fundraising works, and you get a view of what is actually happening at the moment in fundraising.
Sarah Gray is a senior consultant at the International Fundraising Consultancy. Hello Sarah, thank you for coming along to talk to us today. Can you tell us what are the key elements of a really successful capital appeal?
So I very strongly believe that the elements of a successful major donor campaign are similar to any general fundraising campaign. There's three core things that need to be considered. The first is to position your case and your cause and make it as compelling as is possible, and make sure that you have the core of the appeal fully communicated and have the impact the appeal is going to make on donors fully understood and articulated and in writing. The second key element, which again applies to many fundraising campaigns, is ensuring that there are donors who can give at the level that your campaign is going to require. And that involves detailed research, often by specialists, into trusts and foundations, high net worth individuals and corporates when you're running a major donor campaign. And the third critical element is ensuring that the organisation, the charity, has the ability to forge good, strong, lasting relationships with those donors.
Does the chair of your trustees make the best host for a successful cultivation event?
The capital appeal for a big national museum is probably going to attract quite a high profile chair, because it's the transformation of a major building and it's fairly likely that it will be an attractive role to someone who, in this case, because it was linked to the British Army, has just retired from the British Army. To be the figurehead for that sort of appeal is going to be fairly smooth. In my experience, the best chairs have been found by the chief executive of the organisation. The ask has come from them or from one of the other very well connected trustees. That's not to say that as a consultant we wouldn't work with the trustees stroke the chief executive to help find and source an appropriate person, but ultimately it will be through their conversations and them reaching out that the strong appeal chair will be sourced. I have recently worked with a very successful appeal committee. The reason the appeal committee was so successful was because of the very, very strong chair. So the chair was respected by all potential donor prospects, was the first thing. And the second thing, he was very charismatic. So when we ran, for example, a cultivation event, he was often introduced the host, and he would make a speech, and his speeches were superb. Well delivered. He had no concern about explaining why the appeal was happening and asking for money. So he was not frightened, in a very gentlemanly way, to make the ask for funding. Our donor prospects wanted to meet him, wanted to engage with him, and believed in what he was telling them.
Should the host of the event always be the chair of your trustees?
Not necessarily. That person must be somebody who can give themselves and give substantially, and then ask other people to give. And those two abilities are crucial. Once somebody has given themselves, they're in a really good position to ask somebody else. And somebody who has contacts, who is the kind of person that wealthy people want to be associated with, and can open the doors to those contacts and can ask them, which isn't a skill everybody has or is willing to deploy, then that person is the right person. So no, it's not always the chair, and it's well worth spending time waiting to get that right person on board rather than just plumping for it. When people begin to do a capital appeal, then one of the things they really have to avoid is the trustees or the chair either asking somebody else to do it and not picking the right person, or offering to do it themselves and pushing themselves to the front of the queue, which isn't the right thing.
What makes a really good case for support?
A really successful case for support will have three core elements. It will outline and explain what the issue is, and not be internally focused on the organisation. It will explain what the issue is affecting the target audience at large. It will give examples of specific people who are either in danger or under threat within the cause that we're talking about. And most importantly, and this is the key to a successful case for support, it will explain to the reader, the donor prospect, what they personally can do to become engaged and to make an improvement to the situation, why their support, why their help is needed. In reality, it's often supported by letters of support, endorsements. There will be case studies from people who have been affected by the cause. There will be an introduction from someone who is very, very noteworthy, and again, who donor prospects will respect. And I feel it's very important to have images that are emotive and evocative of the charity or cause that you're producing the case for support for. There is an example here which really is pulling on people's heartstrings and explaining why the redevelopment of this National Museum was critical. I particularly like it because I think the image that we've used is quite emotive. You will notice the text is quite emotive and draws on and explains the museum's role through the eyes of a soldier. So it's also quite personal. So you will find that this case for support is peppered with endorsements, verifying and supporting the appeal. Images for a capital appeal, images of the direction of travel are also an interesting approach. And again, explaining your vision, which is what we're doing here, the vision for the new museum, is fairly critical.
If you can't get Downing Street, what's your guidance for a really good, high-profile cultivation event?
So the client that I've recently worked with, which was the National Museum, we ran a range of cultivation events. There were always two key things. One was an exclusive venue, generally a venue where the population at large cannot have access to. And two is a host who people really, really want to come and see. To use an example, Downing Street, as you've just mentioned, We ran a very successful event at Downing Street. Host, George Osborne. He obviously, well, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is an individual who people will respect. So he fulfilled the role of sort of impressive host, or an unusual host. Exclusive venue, Downing Street. That walk up to number 10 Downing Street is something that over 80 of our prospective donors wanted to do and attended the event. And interestingly enough, we had a photographer there. The photographer, towards the end of the event, took a photograph of nearly every donor or donor prospect outside the door. So that was what they wanted. So that worked very well. We also, again with the same client, we ran a different model of event. We used the client's patron, who was a member of the royal family. The patron was the host. Royalty, that's always the element of impressive host. And we ran it at St James's Palace, which again has the element of exclusivity. So slightly different model and a different target audience for that event, but those two factors again together worked, and we had a group of 60 people attend that event.
Does the chair of your trustees make the best host for a successful cultivation event?
The very best hosts will be people who the prospective donors will respect. They will want to come and hear them, they will want to meet them. It's the first point. The second point is the host, the very best hosts will be those who open doors. So it'll be individuals, senior individuals within society who are well connected. So the best hosts I have ever worked with for cultivation events will also be able to introduce other people of influence to the appeal.
Could you tell us things that worked, things that didn't work, if you would, and what are the top tips for folks organising cultivation events wherever they are?
The please don't do this will be do not send the invitations out too late. So it's quite basic, but absolutely critical is to allow, if you can, 3 months, if not 4 months, in your planning schedule to get the date into your prospective donors' diaries, because those donors who have the ability to be a major donor are busy people. What to do, my top tip would be brief the home team. Brief the home team with absolute care and meticulously, absolutely meticulously. Give it to them in writing. Give them biographies of who is going to be attending the event. And if you can, if possible, if you have access, verbally brief them so that they are aware of who the donors are who are attending the event, but as importantly, what the expectations are of them as the home team. Well, of course, the key thing is not the event for the event itself, it's the follow-up. And that's why the event is held. So, following morning, full debrief, gather all of the home team together, those who can't be there, perhaps if there's trustees, email contact, phone contact is very, very important. And each prospect and existing donor who has been there needs to be a discussion about any interaction that happened with that donor and a individual follow-up programme agreed and decided and actioned for those individual donors.
Carol Akiwumi has extensive experience of taking major donors to visit overseas projects on behalf of a UK-based charity. I asked her, how do you get ready, and for some tips.
Major donor cultivation, needs to be part of the overall strategy. It's not a cheap venture, but if it's done right, it's well worth the benefits. So now, assuming you've done your wealth screening, you decide, or you've worked out that you've got people who have a lot of money and a lot of influence, and you begin to cultivate them. The one thing I like to do is look at given history. So I want to see where someone's passion is.
Do you think it's a good use of a charity's money that a spouse accompanies a potential donor, and why?
As long as they're on good terms, it works wonders. Because what it means is that you get somebody else, to work for your charity, somebody else that you can enthuse about your cause, and somebody else that you can actually work with when you return. Because let's face it, a lot of major donors are very busy. And once you get back in the country, life kicks in. Suddenly they might be very difficult, to contact again or to set up meetings with. But the spouse could very easily be the one who is available and who will then be very interested in helping you to, fulfill whatever the objectives are.
Could you give us some examples of situations that you've found yourself in when you've been on a donor trip, that is donor plus spouse?
One of the things that comes up quite regularly is people go out and they see something that captures their heart in a way that you could not have imagined. And suddenly they feel like that's their life's calling. They want to begin to support that. Usually directly, do all they can, throw all the money they can at it, but it doesn't quite fit into your objective or whatever it is the charity had planned. Or maybe it's just a tiny bit of what you're trying to achieve and it's part of telling the story rather than the thing you'd like funding for. That's very common.
You're a fundraiser watching this program and it's your first overseas trip. What are your top tips to get ready?
Well, assuming you've done your homework, and when I say your homework, you've pretty much made sure it's something they're passionate about. One of the things I will say that's very important is to lay out the expectations before you go. And by that I mean what you expect them to do or to consider doing, when they come back. You don't want to be doing that afterwards. You want to make sure that they're aware before they go, you're aware, and that you can begin to have those conversations in a subtle way whilst you're on the trip, and explore ideas about how they might get to that point.
How do you manage the expectations of the people overseas who are going to be visited by the donor?
By speaking to them as well. I mean, one of the things that I've faced in the past is people, your donors speaking directly to the new contacts that they have. It's really easy. You have a conversation with them beforehand and understanding that any conversations should be directed back to you. Any inquiries, should be channeled via, your charity so that you stay in control of that relationship and any benefits that accrue.
What does a successful trip look like?
Usually it happens whilst I'm out there. So before you go, anything can happen. You're not really sure. At that point, they may not be that excited about what you do, or they might be a little bit, two kinds of people I take out. People who are really hot on the charity and you want to turn them into people who will end up leaving legacies. So they're hot, but you want to make them even hotter and you want them to come back as ambassadors, champions who tell other people and recruit other people for you. And also people who don't quite know what you do yet, who you haven't quite got a good relationship with, but you want to fast track that. So those kind of people, I particularly like taking out, because what it means is that whilst you're out on the trip, you can build a relationship, you can share experiences that bind you together that you would never have managed to achieve even if you were cultivating them over 2 years. Because suddenly you're in situations together which you can remember and you can refer to, So they're the kind of people that I like to take out.
We've come to the end of our programme today. We're very glad you have been watching. We'd like to hear from you. Please follow up on social media with us, and if you've got an idea or an experience that you want to share about fundraising out there in the big world, please get in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.